Colleagues, good afternoon or good evening. Please rise for the academic procession.
You may be seated. Good evening, dear colleagues and friends, family of Professor Henry Mbaya. Goeienaand, Molweni. Dear friends and colleagues, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you at this auspicious event, the inaugural lecture of Professor Henry Mbaya. Professor Mbaya, who hails from Malawi and Mpumalanga, studied amongst others at St. Paul's College in Grahamstown, then Rhodes University. He worked in many capacities in the Anglican Church, and later he became lecturer in missiology, the Faculty of Theology at Stellenbosch University, and later moved to church history. Professor Mbaya is, amongst other things, an outstanding researcher. He received the Research Excellence Award from Stellenbosch University in 2021, and he believes developing a passion is a key to research. His passion has always been missionary Christianity, specifically trying to understand how missionary Christianity interacted with African cultures, how missionary Christianity responded to African cultures, as well as vice versa. And then, in trying to understand independent Christianity that is indigenous now and almost independent of missionary Christianity. Fascinating. Professor Mbaya and his wife Anna have 5 children and 5 grandchildren. So he is also a grandfather, grandpa. We want to welcome their family and friends, and in particular those who had to brave some storms to get here tonight. And we want to welcome all who have joined also online. Thank you for your support and interest. Allow me to mention a few special guests here. I want to welcome some previous deans of this faculty, Professor Elna Maton, Nico Koopman, Professor Hendrik Bosman, and tonight Professor Koopman, of course, is here in his capacity as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Social Impact, Transformation and Personnel at the Stellenbosch University, also representing the Rectorate. You all, students, friends of the Mbaya family, in particular Professor Mbaya, are all welcome. Then we want to acknowledge also tonight, and we are honored by the presence of 2 members of the Amaxhosa Royal Council, the Chair, Nzix Ndobake Fufu Sikau, as well as the husband, Chief Chauke Sikau. Welcome. From the Anglican Church, our partner church, in which Professor Mbaya served for many years, we want to acknowledge the Emeritus Bishop Margaret Virtue, former Bishop or Emeritus Bishop now of the Diocese of False Bay. We want to welcome the Very Reverend Ron Phillips. One we can say he is the interim bishop, but he is the Vicar General currently of the Diocese of False Bay. And of course, our beloved Anglican chaplain at the faculty. We want to welcome the current chaplain at the faculty, Dr. Desmond Lambrechts, who is also here tonight, and a number of other serving bishops and pastors, including the Bishop James Tangatenga from Malawi. Colleagues, I'm almost done, but tonight is a very auspicious occasion and we want to acknowledge everyone who is here. Tonight, online and present also is Professor Maxwell Piri from UKZN, Professor Isabel Piri, Emeritus Professor from UKZN, and currently also serving with the World Council of Churches, Professor Denny Philippe, UKZN. We have already seen Professor John Claassen and Professor Ignatius Swart from the University of the Western Cape, Professor Gunther Thomas of the Ruhr University of Bonn, Germany, Professor Thomas Sneegen of the Lund University in Sweden, and then also dear friends of Professor Mbaya, Professor Mika and Auli Vakangas, who is from different universities in Finland, so the Abo University as well as the University of Helsinki. So colleagues, I almost said, well, these few words, it's not a few words, But with these words, I want to welcome all of you. And we are so grateful to be here tonight. Professor Mbaya, we are excited for the evening as a faculty, and we are looking forward to the inaugural lecture tonight. Thank you. I give over to the MC, Utlika Sipo Maukoto. I say Iku.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, we will commence with our program. The program stands as that we will now receive the opening prayer by Reverend Kolam Landu. Then it will be followed by a musical performance, and then thereafter the lecture of the day. We'll call Reverend Landu to come and do the prayer.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening. In Xhosa, we don't have that, so I won't be able to really say it properly because English is a foreign language. So I would say rather molweni. There's a quotation that I got from our late Archbishop Emeritus, Desmond Tutu, that says, "Someone has said religion is what you do with your solitude. Perhaps we should say, as he says so, religion is what you do with suffering, yours and that of others." Let us pray. Dear Lord, this evening, the heavens are celebrating. The clouds of witnesses are cheering. Those living and the ancestors in unison sing songs of praise. This is a kairos moment for this institution, Lord, as it continues to engage itself in the right and critical moment to the realization that we had from the past of our African theologians of all times, who influenced the world in the understanding of God, those who died for this call from God: Bernard Mizeki, the martyrs of Mbokotwane, and many others are too clapping hands. The joy of Kalilombe from Malawi, the just moment of Augustine Musopole, a great theologian from Malawi, who is known for what he termed Umuntu theology. The dancing of Mpumalanga and Mzimvubu's ordinary people of the church, who had experienced who their son's growth has been in love and enthusiasm of knowing more about God in order to share with all people. Bless this moment, Lord, and let it be a time that becomes special and written in the records of our hearts and the heavens. Let our ears listen and our brains store in order to be more educated with excitement of being witnesses and scholars of your servant, Professor Reverend Henry Mbaya, the son of the soil. Pour your spirit unto him and inspire him to speak so that we hear. May all this happen because you are God and you have planned all it to happen. Here in this place, we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Sorry, colleagues, Prof. Mbaya indicated that his daughter will introduce him, then he will come and do the lecture at the podium. We'll give time to Prof. Mbaya's daughter.
Good evening and welcome to this precious moment. I'm so proud to be standing in front of you all tonight. A warm welcome again to Mama Nobake Fufu Stau, the chairperson of Amaxhosa Royal Council, and her husband, Chief Chauke Stau. We are very proud to have you here with us this evening. As I've said, this is such a proud moment for me to be able to introduce my father, Professor Henry Mbaya, this evening. Some of you get to call Professor Henry Mbaya a friend, some of you call him a collaborator, and some of you call him a colleague, a mentor, or a supervisor. But I get to call him my father, together with my 4 siblings. And it is such an honor because we get to observe him and we've gotten to know him better over the years. My father's academic journey started at St. Paul's Theological College in 1987. He also obtained his bachelor's degree at Rhodes University in 1988. Then he went on to obtain his master's at the University of Natal in 1999 and his PhD at UKZN in 2005. During this time, he was also ordained as a priest in the Anglican Church in 1990. His first academic post was at the University of Port Hare in 2009. He then joined Stellenbosch University in 2012, where he has moved departments over the years, but remained in this space since then. His research focuses on Anglican mission history and African culture in Southern Africa in the late 19th and the 20th centuries. It is telling that he is a proud and active member of the Anglican Church community and is committed to telling stories that shed light on different issues in communities. And this speaks to his character, actually, which I've observed closely over the years. My father embodies a quiet strength that does not shout. It does not call undue attention to himself. It is a profound commitment to speaking the truth in a way that is accessible to academia and his Anglican Church community and broader society. And speaking truth also enables us to reflect on our past and consider which stories have been pushed to the margins. And he does not shy away from calling matters by name, even when those names have been painful to many people, including himself. Still, he also does not run away from the complexity of the very nature of the Anglican missionary work within the period. And then there is also his passion for decolonizing academia. This aspect of his work is what resonates deeply with me as a young African woman. His commitment to reshaping the academic landscape to be more inclusive and representative has instilled in me a sense of pride in my African heritage and a determination to amplify the voices of those often unheard. He has delivered many papers at scholarly conferences, but the one that has stood out for me the most was about the fees must fall, the decolonization of tertiary institutions in South Africa, Institute for Contextual Theology, which was presented in Lund, Sweden, in 2017. His work has explored the intricate intersection of faith and ethics, reminding us that principles rooted in spirituality can be powerful guides in navigating the complex ethical challenges of our time. His teachings have extended beyond the classroom, shaping my own understanding of the world and the values that I hold dear. So, I look forward to the speech that he has prepared for us this evening, and I welcome him as well. Thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you so much for this opportunity to address this gathering today. Place, power, and the past, memorialization and monumentalization of religion as a challenge to South African history. Colonial expansion, memory, and history. According to David Lowenthal, the past is a foreign country. They do things in there. Indeed, the past is a foreign territory, for it includes contours of memories that appear to have been lost in the mist of history. It remains unfamiliar because its ways of doing are buried in memory. As Lowenthal says, the past is a foreign country whose features are forged by today's predilections, its strangeness domesticated by our own preservation of its vestiges. The past is alien because it is largely buried in the myth of history. And yet, the past lives with us. It stubbornly refuses to let go, as it keeps reminding us where we come from. Signs, symbols, and signifiers of history seem to serve as beacons of the long shadow of the past. Nevertheless, the past keeps inviting us to revisit it so that we might understand ourselves better in the present. It cannot be completely ignored, precisely because it defines the present moment and shapes and determines the future. In the 1990s, as South Africa moved towards an open society, a part of the 19th century historic past of the Cathedral of St. Michael and St. George in Makhanda, formerly Grahamstown, appeared to rear its head. Like an unplacated ghost, it had come to haunt some white and Amaxhosa members of the cathedral. The controversy that arose centered on the historic narratives that were installed in the cathedral and the John Graham monument next to the cathedral in the 19th century. More specifically, it revolved around the derogatory name of Kephas that was used to refer to Amaxhosa and their role in the English colonial wars. In this respect, this address precisely seeks to address the issue of the relationship between history, memory, religion, in this case, Christianity, and national identities in post-colonial and post-apartheid South Africa. From this viewpoint, the aim of the address is twofold. First, it seeks to highlight the impact of colonialism and apartheid on the Amaxhosa in Makhanda, specifically in relation to the 19th century narratives installed in the Cathedral of St. Michael and St. George. Secondly, to address this challenge, the lecture proposes a more inclusive and diverse approach to memorialization and monumentalization, where the oral narratives of the 19th century Amaxhosa are considered through whatever is left of some of their traditions today. The address has been structured as follows. The first part highlights the European colonial expansion into the Cape Colony in the 17th century and subsequent years, focusing on the then eastern frontier, the center of the English colonial wars, and the erection of the Cathedral of St. Michael and St. George in the 19th century. The second part deals with the controversy that arose at the cathedral in Makhanda in 1990s with regard to the memorial inscriptions. The third part situates the debate within the theoretical concepts of history, memorialization, monumentalization, and power. Finally, the address makes some proposals for the consideration of the oral narratives of the Amaxhosa pertaining to that colonial episode as a missing link to be installed in the cathedral alongside those of the colonial settlers. In his book, Local Histories, Global Designs, Walter Minolo notes that in the period between 1500 up to the 2000s, Western history has dominated global histories, belief systems, and knowledges. He states that one local history, that of the Western civilization, built itself as the point of arrival and honor of human history. This local history and knowledge, Minolo asserts, presumed the totality of all knowledges. It projected itself as the final expression and fulfillment and the arbiter of other knowledges and belief systems. It claimed to own local knowledges and belief systems. It was a systematic attempt not only to own, but to obliterate these knowledges. According to Minolo, prior to the occupation of geographical space, the process of the colonization of non-Europeans was first conceived epistemologically. In the 16th century, so he asserts, Spanish missionaries judged and ranked human intelligence and civilization by whether the people were in possession of the alphabetic writing. This was an initial moment in the configuration of the colonial difference and the building of the Atlantic imaginary, which will become the imaginary of the modern colonial world. Thus, literacy writing was elevated as a special tool to build the colonial imaginary. As time passed, space and geography became a determining factor in the configuration of coloniality. Minolo writes, towards the end of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century, the measuring stick was history and no longer writing. People without history were located in a time before the present. People with history could write the history of those people without. In both principle and practice, colonial epistemology formally legitimized and reinforced the relations of supremacy between those who perceived themselves to occupy the center of the European metropolis and the subservient of the margins. In this discourse and European framework, the native would be brought into the European world, but as a recipient of a gift she could never return, except by acknowledging gratefully his own subordination. In this colonizing project, the Christian missionary would play a special role as agent, scribe, and moral alibi. The Dutch East India Company was a capital-driven multinational mercantile corporation with a number of Dutch commercial interests supported by the Dutch government and military. By the late 17th century, it had grown into one of the largest and most profitable commercial companies at the time. And so Jan van Riebeeck landed at the Cape in April 1652 to take charge of the VOC as a staging post. With the occupation of the Cape, Europe as a geographical space encountered Africa, vice versa. Henceforth, the Cape would be caught up in a matrix of relationships with Europe. Within the space of 2 centuries, the English would capture the Cape from Dutch rule twice, in 1795 and again in 1806. English colonial wars of conquest, the eastern frontier, the Cathedral of St. Michael and St. George. The first European contact with Amaxhosa, a Nguni tribe, took place in 1770 in what was then called the Eastern Frontier, today Eastern Cape, the coastal belt between the Sundays and Kai rivers. This became the scene of armed clashes between the English and Amaxhosa. However, the first encounter between Amaxhosa and the missionary Johannes van der Kemp of the London Missionary Society took place in 1799. 150 years after Van Riebeck's arrival at the Cape, when he visited and settled at Chief Ngqika. This was after the British first captured the colony from the Dutch in 1795. In the aftermath of the Boer trek and the expulsion of Chief Gambe and some 20,000 of his followers from Zeeland in 1811, the British government proceeded with their plans to colonize the region. In an attempt to maintain order, Cape Governor John Cradock decided to station Cape Hottentots in the Zeeland. In 1812, Cradock proclaimed the territory as Grahamstown, named after John Graham. It became the seat of the Magistrate of Albany. The arrival of the 1820 settlers marked a significant phase in the colonization of the ancestral land of Amaxhosa. It is said that at his personal instigation, then Cape Governor Lord Charles Somerset convinced the colonial government to pay for the building of the church on the Farm de Rietfontein, and I quote, "Where there is a British population of 3,000 persons, totally destitute of any place of worship whatever," end of quote. This marked the start of the establishment of what is known today as the Cathedral of St. Michael and St. George. Initially starting as a military church, it took 128 years. To Amaxhosa, the imposing building represented an invasion by a foreign land, an alien people, and a strange culture. It constituted what the French philosopher Michel Foucault calls heterotopia, a strange place within a normal place, an abnormality in a normal place. To Amaxhosa, that which had been familiar to them was now unfamiliar. It was the start of the long process of colonizing their consciousness. In this respect, Amaxhosa history had been invaded. In 1910, a century later, the prominent missionary Archdeacon G. Woodruff stated, and I quote, "It is said among the natives that upon this very spot was placed a crown of a popular chief, Gambe, who claimed authority over all the country from Keiskamma to the Sunday rivers," end of quote. On the very place that once stood Gambe's crown, now stood the cathedral. The Amaxhosa space had been colonized by the English. This space gave the settlers the identity of conquerors. From Foucault's point of view, the location of spaces and structures is critical to the process of knowledge generation and has implications for power relations. In his view, space is interconnected with the notion of geography. The location of spaces, structures, their distribution and interrelatedness, how these are managed and controlled. Hence, knowledge and power is implied. Contestations of colonial history in the cathedral in the 1990s. In the 1990s, as South Africa was transitioning towards an open society, some facets of the history preserved in the cathedral came to be highly disputed, reminding blacks of the oppression of their ancestors and of theirs too in the recent years. The contestation related to the wider debate on the national level of replacing or transforming colonial symbols, giving them new meaning in the new democratic era. It was an attempt to decolonize symbols. Chichala Hewitt, who served as the warden of St. Paul's College in 1992 in Grahamstown, states that the issue of the memorial plaques had been raised on previous occasions within the diocese, but this time in 1992, the issue was more focused. He recalls that a series of meetings led to an extraordinary meeting of the Church Council on 12 October 1992. According to Hewitt, there were 5 plaques that contained the offensive term kefir. And I quote, one memorial commemorating Robert Bambrick, John Norton, Gordon Knowles, F.D. Howell, T.C. White, and John Graham was found offensive, end of quote. The debate surrounding the memorial plaques inside the cathedral was significant from another perspective as well. Though the Hash Rose Must Fall movement at the University of Cape Town would occur only 23 years later, in 2015 and 16, scholarly insights on that movement seem to share many of the points raised during the 1992 controversy. Writing from the perspective of the debate on national statutes, specifically in the context of the Hash Rose Must Fall movement, Vumani Magezi cites British philosopher Thomas Carlyle. It is in and through symbols that man, consciously or unconsciously, lives, works, and has his being. Those edges, moreover, are accounted the noblest, which can the best recognize symbolic worth and prize it highest. Magezi then goes on to argue, and I quote, the UCT students interpreted the statue in their context of marginalization and a sense of alienation from a white-dominated university and its alienating culture. Placing Rhodes at a prestigious public university in Africa symbolized approval of the ideas and ideals that imperialists stood for. And if that is the case, then the university's position was open to be questioned, end of quote. Another example relates to the four-tracker monument in Pretoria, which has been treated with suspicion. Dorf breathes sighs outer Steenkamp asserting, and I quote, "The four-tracker is aesthetically suspect because it is tied to an architectural language that equates order with the civilized. Politically suspect because it is seen as a representative of apartheid totalitarianism. Socially suspect because it is seen as a privileged mode of expression that excluded the other. And ethically suspect in its size and attempt to overwhelm the vista by its grandiosity," end of quote. Thus, by the 1990s, memorial inscriptions in the cathedral, as well as the building as a monument, had become objects of suspicion, similar to some of the monuments in South Africa. Siyabulela Gidi, an Anglican priest, was a student at St. Paul's College in 1992. He and fellow student Themba Phillips refused to be ordained in the cathedral by Bishop David Russell in protest against the monuments. The students' refusal to be ordained was significant, being an act of defiance that symbolically had significant power implications. But there is yet another layer of significance to the issue of memorial inscriptions in the cathedral as symbols and signs. Paul Tillich highlights the significance of a symbol, stating that it transcends itself, pointing to the ultimate reality. He argues that symbols point towards the infinite, which they represent, and towards the finite, through which they symbolize. Hence, they are double-edged. However, Tillich draws a distinction between a symbol and a sign. He asserts that while the sign bears no necessary relation to that which it represents, the symbol participates in the reality of that for which it stands. The symbol is a medium of revelation, a bearer of the mystery of being that becomes part of the meaning of the reality it seeks to convey. Hence, it can open up reality on different levels, with which one enters into a relationship, either emotionally or spiritually. While symbols can evoke positive or negative emotions, signs cannot. This renders symbols more powerful than signs. In light of Tillich's explication, the historical inscriptions in the cathedral had more to them than being mere objects and materials. Situated inside the cathedral, they had acquired a quasi-religious aura and mystique. Consequently, it is possible that they conveyed a deep mystical religious meaning to some white members of the cathedral, to the extent that some members entered into some meaningful fellowship with them, having developed some attachment. This would explain some of these members' reluctance to part with the symbols. The symbols had become part of their worshiping framework and environment. It is evident that what Gidi and others were fighting against were these deep-seated cultures, ethos, and systems that undermine black dignity. There was something of a contradiction here. Blacks celebrating ordination in the very space where the messages on the plaques insulted them and undermined their dignity. In this regard, Hewitt states, and I quote, "Black people found these plaques and inscriptions offensive in a place of worship, and some white people wanted them retained as these were their ancestors and part of their history," end of quote. According to the cathedral's newsletter, The Spire, the Commission of Inquiry, having met in March and June 1993, recommended as follows in November 1995, and I quote, "The Parish Council give serious consideration to the removal of the plaques which have been identified as offensive. A point has been reached in the history of our country at which symbolic acts of reconciliation have been welcomed by all sectors of the community and have become commonplace and unifying places in the result," end of quote. History, memorialization, monumentalization, and power. The preceding discussion foregrounds the issue of the relationship between history, memory, and power, how historical narratives, as inscribed on the plaques and inscriptions in the cathedral, related to history and memory, and how memory influenced the process of documenting and installing historical narratives in the cathedral in the 19th century. From a conceptual point of view, the relationship between history and memory is very complex. This paper is far too limited in scope to do it justice. Instead, it engages with concepts in very broad strokes. In this regard, I follow Robert Fosler's engagement with the work of Paul Ricoeur. According to Fosler, the relationship between history and memory is dialectical in nature. There is tension between them. The two are neither exclusive nor completely harmonious. They entangle and disentangle. Neither do they necessarily overlap. However, they exist in a reciprocal relationship. Fosler further asserts, memory is the matrix of history, and as such, one cannot conceive of history without memory. While Fosler cautions against the assumption that history is merely an extension of memory, he also states that the stance that memory and history are antithetical should be rejected. The debate and contestations at the cathedral in the 1990s centered on the issues of memory and history and their relevance to the context at the time. During the contestations, each group interpreted these inscribed historical narratives from their own worldviews and historical perspectives. For some wise, the inscriptions constituted part of their English legacy, of which they were proud. The narratives were designed to commit to perpetual memory the legacy of their ancestors. This led Michael Wissin, one of the prominent members of the cathedral, to state the following in November 1996, he representing the position of the conservative group, and I quote, "We too have inherited a great and precious trust from those who have worshipped before us and built our cathedral. It is ours to love and preserve for the generations yet to come. Let them, like us, marvel at the ages of faith in Europe and Africa, as they stand at the west end and look towards the morning sun glowing in the east window. Ours is not a lineage of blood, but a lineage of faith," end of quote. Wisson makes a crucial point. The legacy of the cathedral, the visible power of British supremacy, was an enduring sign of the European faith, which starkly contrasted with the Amakhosa relationship, which was based on blood lineage. In other words, in his view, European civilization was in every way more superior to the Amakhosa culture and religion. The structure was meant to be preserved intergenerationally to legitimize the English defeat of the Amakhosa. In this regard, Francois Xavier and others define the role of memorization in legitimizing power as follows, and I quote, "Memorization as organizational product of discursive accounts as claims to legitimacy generates cues that strive to manage audiences' perceptions of the organization, as well as the creation of material signs interpreting the past in the present, ranging from discursive inscriptions such as plaques to materializations cast in statues and buildings," end of quote. With regard to the cathedral, therefore, it was no ordinary monument. It was an assemblage of civil and religious signage and symbolisms. Symbolically to the colonial settlers, it epitomized British supremacy and power, and to the Amakhosa, British brutal thuggery and violence that had led to the dispossession of their land and the destruction of their property and culture. In this process, the English colonial church worked hand in glove with the colonial state. The inscriptions and plaques proclaimed historical narratives that portrayed the English as victors in the wars that they had coined as Kefir Wars. The English assigned to themselves the role of heroes, while Amakhosa were made out to be the villains. This is what provoked anger among some Amakhosa in the 1990s. As Hewitt also remarks, and I quote, "The offensive nature of the plagues was twofold. References to the Amakhosa in the derogatory manner, such as barbarous enemies, in contrast to the heroic acts in the death of T.C. White. Then the second was the derogatory naming of places such as the SP Ade plaque that used Kefir Drift as a name of the place," end of quote. Johann Sillier states, "Monuments more than often have a spiritual character and iconic value, in the sense that they offer a space for the formation or discovery of meaning. Monuments represent a longing for meaning beyond signs of the transcendent. Talking about monuments, Leonard Bell states that they are cultural products that manifest in their material forms and the responses they generate, and in the changing circumstances of their ongoing use, the complexities of their purported identities and relations. However, the occupation of space posed some inherent contradictions. In the very spot where Chief Gyambe and his people had once performed rituals for their ancestors, the same practices that the missionaries condemned as heathen rituals, the English now commemorated their own heroes, martyrs, who had died in the Kefir Wars. Foucault demonstrates the existence of a link between space, power, and knowledge. In his view, space is never neutral, but is associated with creativity. It is both productive and negative. locally defined and yet immanent with particular fields of technology and action. Space is a vital part of the battle for control and surveillance of individuals. But it is a battle, not a question of domination. The cathedral was never a neutral space. The space of the historical narratives turned it into a space of alienation, a heterotopia. For Amaxhosa, because the narratives evoked the memory of trauma of their ancestral past. It perpetually reminded them of the English subjugation, control, and disdain of their ancestors centuries ago. A quest for more inclusive historical narratives of Amaxhosa. In conclusion, the foregoing discussion demonstrates that historical narratives in the cathedral were part of what could be called a Hegelian view of history, which invokes a totalitarian historical consciousness in support of the status quo. This perspective of history sees the rise of a national consciousness coterminous with a view of progress to subdue the other. Aspects of colonial history appear to justify the colonization of Amaxhosa, painting them in a very negative light. It bordered on propaganda. In other words, it denied Amaxhosa their proper role in colonial history. The narratives appear to clash in spirit with some marginal historical narratives that suggested that Amaxhosa were an independent-minded people. In 1847, for example, Reverend William Shaw, a Methodist missionary at the Cape, stated, and I quote, "The border Kafirs know that the white nations apply this name to them, and many of them regard it as a term of contempt," end of quote. Or as Dunbar Moody observed in another context, and I quote, "Amaxhosa are a reasoning and independent people who have no prejudices in favor of Christianity and have no immediate interest to serve by adopting our religion. And it is only by argument that they are to be convinced of its truth," end of quote. To put it in recurrent perspective, the memorial inscriptions in the cathedral told but one of many sides to the story. There were many gaps or gray areas. As recall cautions, memory can indeed be abused, which is why it must be viewed with both suspicion and trust. Karl Marx, in turn, drew attention to the moral dimension of history, and I quote, "True history begins only when humanity breaks with its irrational prehistory and learns to act collectively and freely. And that means with full historical consciousness of its past and future." Of course, this last thought, the need to develop historical consciousness in order to become fully free and human, today seems rather quaint by the eyes of contemporary postmodernists for whom there was never a history to be conscious of, end of quote. From this perspective, recording and narrating history entails the process of dealing with human behavior and freedom, which implies issues of human dignity. In other words, the fact that history is concerned with meaning, experience, and historical consciousness is not irreconcilable with the issues of equality and human dignity. Ojuku Chijoke takes the discussion further in stating, "It is memory that affirms the dignity of the oppressed and the humanity of the enemy, whilst recollecting the act of injustice. Memory, history, and identity are intrinsically intertwined with human dignity because they relate to a human sense of being. Perhaps part of the solution to attempt to restore some dignity for amaXhosa lies in rebalancing the act by retrieving some of the 19th century memories that are still alive in amaXhosa oral traditions. In this respect, oral history as a methodology might help to unravel some stories of the local people in and around Makhanda as conveyed to them by traditions that have survived. Once retrieved, these could form historical narratives that could be placed alongside the narratives of the colonial settlers. In other words, there is a need to hear the other side of the story. Put differently, a dialogue or conversation between the oral histories of amaXhosa and those of the colonial settlers is crucial. There ought to be a dialogue of truth between these local histories and the colonial narratives that came to be canonized. I suggest erecting memorials in the cathedral precincts, the place where Gambia's Kral once stood, to his memory, and alongside it, narratives relating to the wars and the expansion of amaXhosa in 1811. A similar initiative started to some extent when government renamed Grahamstown after the 19th century Xhosa military leader Makhanda. The post-1994 era has also seen the erection of some important monuments, such as Freedom Park and the Hector Peterson Memorial Museum in Soweto. Performing a symbolic ritual cleansing ceremony in and around the cathedral might also be something worth considering. Corey Villeneuve affirms that the new narratives we form as individuals and a society are crucial in terms of our identity and our relationship to others and the world around us. New narratives and identity are crucial to fostering the spirit of reconciliation in a country previously polarized along racial lines. This is the foundation of our human dignity. Here again, one is not oblivious, whether consciously or otherwise, to the dialectical nature of the relationship between memory and history, or to its implications for documenting history, as cautioned by scholars such as Ricoeur. I also take cognizance of the critique raised by Villeneuve, that new memorials could merely create other official narratives that exclude, that one official narrative could merely displace another. Villeneuve further cites Charles Villavicencio, who raises a similar challenge, namely that the stories that emerge in testimony are incomplete, as memory is incomplete. At the same time, however, Villavicencio calls for a listening to the incompleteness, the silences, the body language, and the complexity of emotions that accompany telling narratives of the past. This, in my view, is plausible sentiment, particularly also in the context of the controversy that arose in the cathedrals St. Michael and St. George. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Dear Dean and former Deans, dear Chairperson and Chief of the Matlosa Royal Council, dear staff and students of Stellenbosch University and other campuses, dear church leaders, dear guests, beloved, I have a wonderful mandate. My mandate is to congratulate Prof. Henry Mbaya and to hand this certificate to him. Prof. Henry Mbaya is officially a full professor at Stellenbosch University. You can never not give a theologian the opportunity to say something. It is for us a pleasure, colleague Henry, that somebody like you is a full professor. You embody the values of this institution. We call it the e-care values. On one hand, excellence, compassion, accountability, respect, and equity. And tonight, we could experience excellence. If you look at this paper, this inaugural address, it radiates excellence. So we got to know you over many years, colleague Henry. But then also compassion. It is, in a sense, difficult to jump up with joy if you listen to what this colleague was talking about tonight. You could deal with this difficult theme because you are driven by compassion. And today is also the birthday of the Bellard Confession that originates from Africa. And that confession tells us that we don't achieve justice without hearts of compassion. So thank you for that. And then accountability. Give account of the hope that lives in you. And we could see it, that this difficult topic you dealt with, but you didn't leave us hopeless. You leave us with energy, respect. Take off your specs and look again. Put it on again. Respect. Look again. Consider again. Think again. Look back. Look to the present. Look forward. Your daughter referred to your softness, and you always radiate this soft respect. When we're in your company, we really feel affirmed, respected, even revered, dignified. And tonight, equity in a very special way. Colleague Reggie was sitting next to me. We served together in the Visual Redress Committee of the university, and he just said, Nico, this is visual redress. You gave to us pointers tonight, parameters for this university's commitment to human dignity, to restitution. One of the co-drafters of the restitution statement of the university is also here tonight. colleague Jerome Slamat with his wife, and you work closely with him as well. But you gave us tonight concrete guidelines, parameters for doing proper visual redress and restitution. And then, Chairperson and Chief, we have started on a journey, partnership, and I think this document of tonight can also help us on that journey. In conclusion, colleague, there's one thing that I need to mention. I was invited at the beginning of this year to the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences and to speak about staff and student health and well-being. And they gave me the topic, the power of fun. Phew, it was one of the most difficult topics for me. But I want to say there is one thing with our brother here. He seems so calm here, but I sense in you always temperate, joy, naughtiness, fun. Let's have fun.
Can I say something? Just say thank you.
No. Dr. Prof. Dion?
Well, colleagues, mine is the great privilege to be able to offer a few words of thanks. Wasn't this a truly special evening? Let's give a hand to our lecturer for this evening. Mfundisi Mbaya, the one who teaches us, Ujingalwazi, the great warrior of knowledge, we celebrate with you and with your family tonight. And we want to give thanks to God for you and for the many gifts that He bestows upon us through you. Tonight, we also want to thank those who have made this such a truly special and wonderful evening. Firstly, to begin with our faculty partners, to our Dean, Professor Reggie Nell, to our faculty manager, Mrs. Eshwa Benjamin, to Mrs. Divine Robertson and our colleague, Simbarasha Pondani, for all of their work in putting things together with Auntie Minnie and Joseph. We truly are grateful for the hospitality and care that you've shown us tonight. We also want to say a sincere word of thanks to the registrar's team, to Jonathan Dale Blankenberg. Where is Jonathan Dale? Over there. We've kept him busy in this faculty, my Dean. We've got excellent colleagues who've been promoted, and Jonathan Dale, we're so grateful to you, to Hendrin, to UNA, to Ignis, for the wonderful work that you do in putting together these special evenings. We also want to say a very special word of thanks to our Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Social Impact, Personnel and Transformation. Nico, we've kept you busy as well, and we are so grateful for the evenings that you spend with us. Of course, you belong to us. You are still a member of the department of which Professor Mbaya is a professor. And if ever you should choose to come back, we have an office for you. So thank you very much for spending this evening with us. Wasn't the music just amazing? Let's give the brass band another hand. Well, friends, this truly is an evening of celebration, and we give thanks to God above all. Colleague Henry, for you and your gifts and for bringing us together to be able to celebrate. I think our MC will give us some final instructions, but please let the celebrations continue.
I would like also to take the opportunity to say thank you, but first I think I must also acknowledge, before I even say thank you, to the royal couple before us, Nkosazana nobakhe futhi sicawu. Bayethe. And Chauke sicawu. Siyabulela ngobukho benu. Siyavuya kakhulu enkosi. Nasenza singabantu. Enkosi kakhulu siyabulela. Thank you. I would like to say thank you to the Rectorate, Professor Koopman, but also our Dean and colleagues in the faculty, but also colleagues who have come from UWC. I would like to say thank you so much indeed, but also former colleagues who have since retired who are here. I'm not going to mention their names because there are a number of them, but all of them, I see them around. I'd like to say thank you so much indeed for the colleagues who have retired, but made it, took this opportunity to come here. I don't take this lightly. Thank you so much indeed. I really appreciate it. But also in a special way, to thank Bishop Margaret, who is here, and clergy from the Diocese of Falls Bay, senior clergy and all the clergy who are here. I'm not going to mention their names, but to say thank you so much indeed for being here in this church. But also in a special way to say thank you so much to members of my family who have come all the way from Mpumalanga, others from Klerksdorp, but also friends from the Eastern Cape who are here. I want to say thank you so much indeed, but also let me also echo my gratitude to the choir, to the brass band. You have performed very, very, very well indeed, as you did the other day at St. George's Church when I first heard of you in Sarepta. Thank you so much indeed. But also in a very, very special way, to say thank you to my wife, Anna. This address would not have been possible without her support, and our children and grandchildren. But also to thank others, members of my family, others in Manchester, Dr. Patrick Mbaya and Malini Mbaya, who have been following the proceedings, and colleagues in Turku, in Sweden, in Malawi, in all over the world, and students in Berlin and somewhere else, all over some other places. So to say thank you so much indeed for being part of this whole function this evening. Thank you so much indeed. I really appreciate it.
Thank you to the brass band. They were saluting Prof. Mbaya with the last item. Colleagues, we have come to an end of this inaugural lecture. We want to thank everyone, the family, the colleagues and friends of Professor Mbaya who came to attend this inaugural lecture. Now, I just want to announce that we will have refreshments as you go out of this hall. On your left-hand side, the first table on your left-hand side, it's for those who have dietary needs. Then you go to that table. As you proceed, on your left-hand side, the first table is for those who requested the dietary needs. Colleagues, thank you so much. We hope that you will travel safe. We are praying for that. And have a good evening. Let's stand and give the procession a chance to leave the hall.